Right, now you mentioned a couple times that death is the separation of the body from the soul. Do you think near-death experiences in any way contribute towards the case for substance dualism? And if so, how?
Well, they do so very powerfully.
Hmm.
And they do so, Sean, in two ways. Now, let's go back to the law of identity. It says that if you're identical to Spider-Man, then everything true of you will be true of Spider-Man and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing that's true of Spider-Man that isn't true of you, then you're not the same. Okay. But it's also the case that if there's one thing possibly true of you that wouldn't be possibly true of Spider-Man, then even if those aren't actual, if they're at least possible, then you can't be the same thing. Let me give you an example. You said, suppose that you're from California, but Spider-Man was from New York. Well, suppose that both of you were from California. But suppose that we knew that there was something about your makeup where it was not even possible for you to have been born outside of California. Let's just assume there was something about your biology that geographical location was essential for you to be born, okay? So you're not even possibly able to be born outside of California. Now, let's suppose that Spider-Man is born in California, just like you are, but he could at least possibly have been born in New York, okay? So that means that there's something that's possible about Spider-Man, even though it's not true, but it's possibly true, that's not possibly true about you, and that's enough to show you're not the same thing. Are you with me on that?
Yep.
Okay. So if we had two little piles of grain and they both were the same color of white and they had the same shape and the same weight and everything, and we were going to annihilate both of them, but we knew that if we possibly put one in water, it would dissolve, but the other pile wouldn't dissolve if it was put in water, even though we would never put them in water because we're going to burn both of them up before we have a chance to. The simple fact that one could dissolve if it were put in and the other couldn't is enough. Well, now listen to this argument. I am the kind of thing that could at least possibly survive in a disembodied state after I die. My brain and body not only do not survive the death of my brain and body, but they couldn't even possibly survive in a disembodied state after the death of my body. I have no idea what it would mean to say my brain could exist disembodied. So one thing I know about my brain is not only my body, I'll just say brain for simplicity. I know that my brain is not going to survive the death of my brain and body, but I know that it couldn't even possibly survive. Now, maybe I don't survive in the afterlife. Maybe all these near-death stories are false. But they're surely possibly true. I mean, I with two Christians debated three atheists on life after death for 6 hours over 2 days.
Wow.
And the three atheists were all willing to allow the evidence to decide the issue. And their argument was that there's not enough evidence for life after death. Well, I pointed out that the fact that they and everybody who watches a Dateline NBC that's going to talk about near-death experiences, everybody who watches that, even if they're completely disbelieving in near-death experiences, they all have the attitude, look, I'll get off my back, honey. I know you believe in this, I don't, but I'll admit they might be true, and I'll let the evidence settle. Let's all watch a show. We'll see what the evidence is. Well, that means they're admitting it's possible. Because nobody would watch a show that was going to prove that archaeologists discovered square circles in Montana. Because, I mean, you're going to say, I don't need to watch that because there can't be evidence. It's impossible. And just like those atheists who let the evidence settle the issue, they were admitting that it is possible that I could survive in the afterlife. but I don't think there's enough evidence that I do. Well, what does that show? It shows not that I survive in the afterlife. That requires evidence, but it shows that I can't be my brain and body, since I have a potential. I am this kind of thing that could very well possibly survive without my brain and body, but that's not true of my brain and body. They're not even possibly such that they could survive. So I cannot be identical to anything physical because I have a potential that nothing physical has. I could survive disembodied. That's number one.
Okay, now hold on. Before you go to the second one, I want to make sure people understand that you're making a point that even the concession that near-death experiences are possible, not even actual, is a recognition that a human being, in principle, could survive their identity intact in a disembodied state. It wouldn't make any sense to say that my brain could survive in a disembodied state, which shows that I'm not just my brain, because there's a distinction here between body and between soul. So just not even getting to the evidence, which is where I suggest you're going next, the very idea that people concede and even debate the evidence for near-death experiences, rather than just stopping it in the past and saying such a thing is absurd and not possible and can make sense, concedes that we are not identical to our bodies. That's the first one. Excellent.
That's the first one. Yep.
Okay.
Not evidence for an afterlife, but evidence that I'm not my body, I'm a soul. Now, the next one is that it is beyond reasonable doubt that near-death experiences are largely true. There have been something like 300 million people that have had near-death experiences around the world due to statistical analyses. And we have cases where two research scientists at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine studied 25 patients that were born blind and had never seen in their lives. They had near-death experiences, and they were able to describe in complete detail. They did not have color words, but they could say bright and dark. They could describe moles and things on another person's, on their mother's face that they couldn't feel or know any other way. And so they gained sight, but once they came back into their bodies, they lost their ability to see again. And these were research scientists at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. There have been hundreds of cases, medically documented, where people who claim to have had a near-death experience and gain information about things that were going on in the hospital cafeteria or in the intensive care unit, which is on the second floor, and they were on the first floor, or they could describe crazy details about what happened when they were dead that are later verified by the doctors and nurses and eyewitnesses that there's no way they could have known if what they'd experienced was just a loss of oxygen to the brain or some kind of dying brain phenomenon that happens to people because their brain is dying. There's no way that these could be explained that way. And so this provides evidence that people do survive, their souls depart their bodies, and they're able to be aware and gain information that is factual and that is verified. And so that this is evidence that life after death is real and that we are souls. We're not our bodies or brains.
JP, I've had our mutual friend Steve Miller on here a couple times, and I'll link to his interview below. We have gone into depth making the case for near-death experiences we don't hear, but if they're even possibly true and then actual, minimally we at least have evidence that a human being is more than matter and that there is a soul or conscious part of the self that continues after the body stops functioning. So one piece of evidence on the column for the soul. Let's move to another piece of evidence here. And this word is big. Some folks might not be tracking with it. So just explain a little bit what it is. It's called the mereological argument for the soul.
Well, yes. Persons are all or nothing kinds of things. either something is a person or it's not a person. There is no sense to saying that my sister Susie is 75% of a person. She used to be 85%, but now she's down to 75%. Persons can't be divided. I mean, you can't take a person and divide them so you've got a third of a person over here and 2/3 over there. Persons can lose functioning. I could be functioning 75% of what I used to, but notice it's still me that used to function 100% that's now functioning 75. I am the same in the comparison. But brains and bodies and material objects can be divided into percentages and can come as 2/3. I mean, in a table, if you cut a third of it off and separate them, you say, where's the table? And the answer is 2/3 of it's over there and a third of it's over there. Well, your brain, in many surgeries, they take out 55, 56% of the brain, and you're only a 45% of a brain left. And yet, when you wake up from surgery, you are a single whole person. If you were your brain, you would be a 45% person. There's a syndrome called Dandy Walker syndrome, which you can go online and actually see x-rays of a person's head. These are people that have 10% of a brain. The inside of their skull is 90% a sack of fluid. And there's a little, about a centimeter thick sheath of brain tissue on the inside of the skull. These people have normal lives. They can function 70 to 80% of a normal person. They get married, have jobs, but they don't have but 10% of a brain. Now, what we know then is that we can't come in percentages, but physical objects can, so we can't be physical objects. Another way to put that is to say that if a physical object loses parts and gains new parts, it's not the same physical object. So suppose I have a wooden podium I'm lecturing on, and every day one of the janitors comes in and takes a little piece of the podium off and puts it in a closet and replaces it with a green little piece of green plastic. So I come in the next day and the desk is the same size and shape, but there's this odd little green plastic part on it. He keeps doing that until all of a sudden the podium is entirely made of green plastic parts. It's the same size and shape as the original podium, but the original podium doesn't exist. There's just a bunch of little wooden parts in the closet. And if he takes those and puts them back together to form a podium that looks exactly like the original one, and I have to choose as to which one's the original podium, it's clearly going to be the one that's reassembled, because there's no way that you can take a wooden podium and say it's the same thing as one that's totally made out of green plastic. So a physical object can't lose parts and gain parts and literally be the same thing. It can for popular purposes, but not really. Now, my body is constantly losing cells, including my brain. My brain parts are moving. Atoms in my brain are sloughing off and new atoms are being absorbed. And that's true of the cells and the atoms in my body. So from one day to the next, my brain and my body are not literally the same brain and body if we're talking about the whole brain and the whole body. But I am the same person from one day to the next, or 1 minute to the next. How do I know that? Well, first of all, there's nothing more obvious than if I'm humming a tune and I'm halfway through the first verse, that I am the one who just hummed the first half of the verse, am now humming the middle of the verse, and am anticipating humming the rest of the verse. I'm just aware that I am the same hummer through the process of singing that tune.
Hmm.
And we are just aware that we are the same from one moment to the next, the same self. Another thing would be this. If we are not literally the same person from one day to the next, I should never fear going to the dentist, because it will not literally be I that goes to the dentist. It'll be a look-alike that has a lot of my memories, but it won't, strictly speaking, be me that goes. Nor should a person be punished for something a crime they committed a year ago, because they're not literally the same person that committed the crime. But we all know that it's the same person, and that's why we punish them, because we know they stole the money. And so my body is not the same from day to day, because it gains and loses parts, even though it looks very much like it, but strictly it's not the same. But I am the same. And therefore, I cannot be my brain and body, and I've got to be something that is not physical, because I can survive the gain and loss of parts of anything physical that's connected to me, my brain and body, and so on.
I remember when I was doing the MA Phil program, 2000 to 2003
Oh my,
at
oh my.
Talbot. I know it's been 2 decades plus since I started. And I've told you this, but my wife said it was one of the most, and we were high school sweethearts, just transformative time for me, which is why I love teaching at Baiola and want to get as many students there as I can. But I remember in your metaphysics class, you made a point about identity over time. And even our criminal justice system assumes that I am identical to the person who committed a crime. Could
Amen.
be 6 months ago. It could be 6 decades ago.
You really could.
So the body changes, and no one's going to be able to give a defense and say, but it wasn't me because I've got gray hair, I've lost some hair, I've gained some weight, lost some weight. No, you are identical amidst the bodily changes. Now, some people will say things like, what about memories? Why can't memories be the source of identity over time?
Well, because first of all, I'm aware of being the thing that has memories. I'm not aware of being a bundle of memories. When I remember scoring a basket in my senior year in high school basketball, that is a memory, but I'm aware that it belongs to me and not you. I'm having the memory. So that means I'm also aware of me in addition to the memory, because I'm aware of being different from, but having the memory. That's the first thing. Secondly, I am constantly gaining and losing memories, dude. I mean, as I get older, I have to be reminded of things by my daughters, because I forget them. So and I'm gaining new memories. I mean, 2 days ago, I didn't have the memories I now have of yesterday, because as I go on, I add new memories. So my memories are in a constant state of flux. I'm gaining and losing new memories, and they would not. And I'm also, my personality changes slightly. I've over the years developed some new values, and some of the values I used to hold, I don't hold to as much anymore. Like physical appearance is not a value that I have like perhaps I used to have. So I can't just be a set of memories and personality traits, because those things are in constant change, but I'm not. I'm the same person over time.
What about DNA? DNA arguably is not physical. From the moment of conception, you had DNA, and your DNA can't change. Could that ground identity over time?
Well, I think DNA is very much like smoke is to fire. Smoke is not the same thing as fire, but it's darn good evidence that fire is there. And I don't think DNA is what my identity consists in. Because I am one thing, but my DNA is all throughout the body. Each cell has DNA, but I would say DNA is a sufficient test that it's me.
Okay.
But and also, a lot of scientists are starting to say that there's DNA is immaterial, and really there's only one DNA, and it's fully present in all the cells of the body. So it's kind of fully everywhere. Well, I mean, that's not matter, because matter is not in different places at the same time, and it sounds an awful lot like Aristotle's soul. So what I want to say is that many of the modern analyses of what information is makes it very, very close to the essence of an Aristotelian soul in the ancient world, and they seem to me to be almost interchangeable.
Okay, so let's shift to one more positive argument for the soul, and then look at some challenges and objections that you also cover in the book. You hinted at this one earlier, the existence of free will. What do we mean by free will? How do we know we have it? And why does that point towards the reality of the soul?
Well, by free will, I'm using what philosophers call libertarian free will, and which studies have shown is the common sense view. Doesn't mean it's right, but it is the common sense view of what free will amounts to. And that basically means that if I'm deciding whether to raise my hand and vote, or just to keep my hand down and not vote, or maybe to go home and watch a ball game instead of sticking around for the vote, at the moment of choice, the choice is completely up to me. I can either raise my hand or not raise my hand, and there's nothing that determines that one happened versus the other. What I choose to do is entirely within my control. It is the result of me choosing it, and nothing determines it, because if it's determined by something, then it's not a free choice. That's what we mean by common sense libertarian freedom. The choice is up to me, and I could have done otherwise without anything determining what I do one way or the other.
Okay.
Now, the problem is that no physical object of any kind, no matter how simple it is, like just a simple tiny rock, or how complicated it is, like a fish's body and all the intricate cells that make it up. If it's a physical object, then it is not free to choose what it's going to do, because physical objects behave according to the laws of physics and chemistry and what happens, what impinges on the body. So just a silly example, but suppose you have some kind of projectile moving through space. Let's say it's an arrow. Now, if that arrow is moving at a certain velocity, and somebody throws a rock and it hits the arrow, then that arrow is going to move in a specific direction, change directions at a specific new velocity, dependent entirely on the forces in the laws of contact and gravity, and how much mass the rock had that hit the arrow. It doesn't get hit and then somehow decide, I'm going to go a different direction this time.
Sure.
Now, even if the laws of quantum physics are indeterminist, that doesn't matter, because a free choice has got to be self-determined. It's not enough for it to be random, because if I just randomly one day and I had a nervous twitch and my arm randomly just shot out and popped some guy in the face, I wouldn't be responsible. That would have been a random accident. Free choice has got to be one I choose. So random quantum events can't explain free will and responsibility, because they're not self-chosen, they're random. The other thing is that if quantum events and quantum laws are indeterministic, then at least the universe at some time and the laws of quantum nature fix the probabilities of what's going to happen next. At least they do that.
Okay.
But if I choose to act, that's, unless there's somebody holding my arm down, that there's a 100% chance that's going to happen, unless I'm disabled in some sense. And so it's not probabilistic once the choice is made. Now, whether I choose or not is probably going to depend upon how I see things and, if I have weakness of will or what have you. So the bottom line is this: if I'm my brain or my body, then I'm governed by the laws of nature and what impinges on me. That's not self-choice or self-responsibility. In order to have that, or libertarian freedom, I have to transcend the laws of nature and be able to act into the natural world from a standpoint above and not determined by it. And that would be possible if I were a transcendent soul. But if I'm not, then free will, as we obviously self-evidently know it to be, in my opinion, is just ridiculous. Nobody's responsible for anything.
So now, of course, it's possible that we live in a universe in which we just think that we have free will. It's an illusion, and we're not actually responsible for anything. But I suspect you would push back and say, but nobody really believes that. Nobody thinks that. Nobody lives that way. So it seems like a worldview that can account for free will at least has a check mark on its side versus one that can't. Is that where you would go in response?
I would absolutely say that. And I would also add that if we don't have free will, nobody could affirm that. Nobody could ever say it. Because if there's no free will, then rationality is gone. And here's why. Consider that you're deliberating about a problem you're trying to solve. And you're looking at the problem and you're weighing the evidence on one side and the arguments on the other. And you go through a process of deliberation and you end up drawing what you think is the best conclusion possible. And you say, I think the answer is A. I don't think it's B. I think it's A. Okay. Now, when you're in that 5-minute process of weighing both sides and the arguments for and against A and B, you are assuming that you're in a process of reasoning towards the best rational, most likely to be true conclusion you could possibly get, right? You're assuming that. And that means that you're assuming that what you're going to conclude has not been determined yet. If you thought that what you're going to come down on, A or B, was already determined before you started reasoning about it, what would you be thinking yourself doing and reasoning about? You're assuming that your deliberation is actually going to contribute to the answer you end up with, right? And that it hasn't, that you're going to decide it once you've got all the evidence before you and make your best choice. So if determinism is true, or if there's no libertarian freedom, then there is no such thing as deliberating about what you're going to do. That's what you end up is already set in concrete by factors before you even started thinking about it that were outside your control. So rationality presupposes a debt to freedom. And so if a person denies libertarian freedom, they can't do so rationally because they're undercutting a necessary condition for there to be rationality in the first place. And thus, they ought to remain silent because they can't trust anything they say to be true.
The entire moral enterprise rests upon free will as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We hold people to be worthy of punishment or praise. I mean, you take somebody who has a high-paying job but they sacrifice and go into the inner city in a very dangerous area, and they start teaching seventh grade math at a rundown, kind of a rough school. And they do that for 25 years and retire. Now, that person is worthy of a tremendous amount of respect and praise, right? I mean, I think it would be a legitimate thing if they're a believer for the church to bring that person in front of the congregation and say, Joe is retiring at the end of this year. This is what this man's done. Let's have a celebratory feast for him. But that is assuming that he's worthy of praise. But that assumes that he could have done otherwise. And the fact that he went down and did that for 25 years was due to a choice that he freely made. And it wasn't that he was determined by forces outside of his control. If we knew that he had been drugged and somehow these drugs that he was given every day determined that he would have to do that and it wasn't his choice, we would no longer praise him. Same with punishment. We only punish because we think that people had a choice in the matter and they made a bad choice, and thus it's on them.